Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the latest segment of Affecting Change. This is EFF's live stream series where our panelists tackle the latest issues in civil liberties and human rights in technology and the digital world. My name is Daly Barnett. I am a senior staff technologist here at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and I will be hosting today's discussion. Before proceeding, we have a few housekeeping items to go over. First of all, we will be recording this session, but only a video of our speakers will be included. Please join us now in the official chat via Twitch at eff.org/livestream. In this chat, you can drop your questions throughout the program, and our guests will answer them, as many as they can, at the end of our discussion. And if you are comfortable, we encourage you to type in a hello world in the chat window now and let us know from which part of the world you're tuning in from. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF is a nonprofit whose technologists, like myself, and our activists and attorneys have been fighting for your online privacy and free speech since 1990. You are the reason that EFF can take on this important work. So, if you'd like to help us in the fight to defend your digital freedoms, please consider donating at eff.org/supportchange, or picking up a cool bit of EFF merchandise at shop.eff.org. And with that, I'd like to welcome our speakers, Rin Alajaji, Andy Eisenson, and Mandy Sally. Thanks so much for being here. Please take a moment to introduce yourselves and the work that you do. I'll throw it over to Rin first.
Thank you so much for having me today. Hi, my name is Rin. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm a legislative activist at EFF, primarily focused on state legislation, impacting digital privacy, civil rights, and free expression. I'll pass it over to Andy.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. It's evening for me. My name is Andy Eisenson, and I'm the legal director at the Chosen Family Law Center and one of the clinical instructors at the LGBTQ plus advocacy clinic at Harvard Law School. I focus primarily on LGBTQ family law and chosen family law and the ways that we can use tools of family, chosen family, and community to render the state obsolete.
I love that. And my name's Mandy. This is going to be confusing at some point this evening. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the chief operating officer at the Woodhull Freedom Foundation, and we're an organization focused on affirming sexual freedom as a fundamental human right. And we do that through research, public education, and advocacy. And thanks so much for having me.
Well, I'm so thrilled to have each of you here. You'll each bring very unique and important perspectives on our conversation. So let's just jump right into it, shall we? I want to start with talking about how queer people today are facing unique, advanced, and persistent threats, both online and off. Some people tuning in may not already be clued into the connections between digital civil liberties, digital rights, and LGBTQIA+ people's rights. So I want to ask each of you how you draw those connections, where you form those connections, and how it informs your work today. Let's start with you, Rin.
There you go. Sorry, the mute button wasn't working. Yeah, I mean, we at EFF are pretty consistently affirming that LGBTQ rights are digital rights and digital rights are LGBTQ rights. You know, LGBTQ folks have, you know, through time found ways to find themselves, whether it be books or the internet or TV, and the internet has provided such a great way for folks to find representatives of our community and to really find themselves. So that community, that sharing of information has, I think, really shows that connection really boldly and importantly. So that's, for me at least, how I make that connection, especially as a young person who used the internet to find themselves and learn more about themselves as well.
Thanks, Fran. Andy, can I pass it over to you?
Yeah, I think a lot about the role of the internet in the socialization of queer people, because I'm just a little bit too old to have had internet when I was at the age that I, needed those connections. I was a like rural, isolated queer person, many such cases. And I simply had no way of accessing the information that I wasn't the only person like me in the world. And young queer and trans people have that now. They can go online and they can type in, here's how I feel. Is there anyone else that feels this way? And the answer is yes. And they're immediately brought into contact with community and reflection and care, and the idea that there is a way for them to grow up. There is a future for them. And I really don't think we can underestimate how important that is. That's something, queer people having access to that at a young age is something that, like, everything else that we're facing is not unprecedented. Like, the methods of repression are new, just because the technology changes, but the fact of the repression and the reasoning behind it is not new. It's the same old, same old. But the thing that's actually unprecedented is a generation of queer and trans people growing up knowing that they're not alone. Like, that's something that's actually never been seen before. And I don't think that it's possible to overestimate how powerful they are.
Wow, thank you for the reminder of the positive impact there. That's really touching my heart. Thank you, Andy. Mandy, I'm curious to hear how you respond to this prompt.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with everything Rin and Andy said. And to sort of piggyback on Andy's thought, Andy's remarks, we have also seen a backlash to all of the positivity that comes from being able to access information and community in online spaces. And so I think the internet has allowed us to grow and connect and organize in so many ways, particularly for queer, transgender, nonconforming folks. And now we're seeing a trend where the internet is attempted to be limited, or access to the internet and the ways in which we express ourselves online is being limited. We're also seeing that the internet, particularly social media platforms, are becoming less safe for LGBT plus folks. GLAAD does a social media safety index every year. And this year, the report just came out, I think last month. So this information is like fresh off the presses. And they found that platforms are frequently over moderating legitimate LGBTQ expression. And I'm reading directly from the report here. But that includes things like wrongful takedowns of LGBTQ accounts and creators, mislabeling LGBTQ content as, quote unquote, adult or explicit, demonetization of LGBTQ plus material, shadow banning, and all sorts of other kinds of suppression online. So it's this wonderful resource that's been so positive. And now we're starting to see it become less safe and a lot more restrictions of speech and expression online.
Well, that's a pretty great segue into my next talking point here that I wanted to raise with each of you, which is that, we've seen bullying and harassment cited as reasons for introducing these new laws or just tightening platform moderation policies on the various tech companies. But these measures can, as you sort of pointed to, Mandy, end up restricting LGBTQ plus expression or visibility online. So I'm curious to hear how each of you have seen language around safety or preventing bullying or harassment used to justify censorship. And what's the line between genuine protection versus harmful overreach and reduction of queer speech online? I think I'd like to start with you, Mandy, since you were just there.
Yeah, since I just brought down the whole mood, I'll just keep it going. Yeah. So, well, I think one of the best examples of this is a piece of federal legislation that's been floating around for a while now called the Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA for short. And it's right in the name, right? The stated goal by our legislators with this is to keep kids safe online. And what we're concerned about is that KOSA is actually going to increase censorship, increase over moderation online, and limit access. And the thing that really concerns us at Woodhull about pieces of legislation like KOSA is that this is what I feel is sort of akin to like a book ban or an educational gag order, right? So what I'm really concerned about is the fact that this legislation is meant to, quote unquote, keep kids safe online, but it's going to censor, it's going to limit access, and we're living in a country where access is already limited in so many offline spaces. So we see that used all of the time. KOSA is just one example of it happening at the federal level. And the other sort of term we see all the time is called material harmful to minors. And we see that used in legislation, most often online age verification legislation, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit more later. But it's, for me, when I see those words, I'm like, something shady is going on here. Like, our legislators are trying to sort of slide something into law here that is potentially problematic.
Good point. And it's difficult to disagree with something like kids' safety, right? When you enter into the room disagreeing with that, you look like a real monster. I'm actually thinking of Andy, how you introduced the conversation with queer kids today having access to like learn about themselves and find community and envision a future where they can survive. And I'm thinking now about this conversation, like reducing the type of speech or materials that can be allowed online. And it just makes me think of like which kids are safe, which materials are dangerous, who's actually being impacted, who's being hurt here.
Absolutely. And when you
Talk
when
more?
you
Yeah.
when you hear people talk about, when you hear particularly like a repressive institution that doesn't really have your actual safety in mind, talk about safety, and particularly the safety of children, like it's about control. And a lot of the time in the narratives that are being spun around like the protection of children from, for example, coming into contact with queerness or coming into contact with the fact that trans people exist, it's all very mixed up in the stuff. I think a few of us were at the conference a year or two ago about the Comstock Act, which the whole narrative of the Comstock Act is about preventing, protecting the safety of young people from pornographic or obscene materials by using the post office. And at the end of the day, like what was the Comstock Act used for, and what is it being likely to be used for today? It's about the restriction of reproductive autonomy and the restriction of queerness. And all of that has always been wrapped up in the narrative of protecting children. And I did get permission from Daly to get a little wonky here, but when you drill down in the narrative of protecting children, you don't have to dig very far before it starts being about protecting the purity of childhood, which is very wrapped up in white supremacy, and very wrapped up in we've got these pure white, perfect children who are going to be the vehicle through which, the white race propagates itself. And we have to protect them from anything that might damage that, like having access to birth control, like having access to the idea that you don't have to be heterosexual or cisgender, like having access to gender affirming care that may impact, as an adult, your fertility. At the end of the day, a lot of this project, when you dig down far enough, you hit white supremacy.
Wow, thank you for naming that. And when you mentioned Comstock, it reminds me of how I knew nothing about Comstock like 3, 4 years ago. I'm not a lawyer. I don't study the law. I'm a technologist. But when I did learn about Comstock, it really like surfaced for me how porous or shifty and slidey obscenity is, and how it can be like applied to something like abortion medication, which is like considered uniquely obscene in this context, where it's dangerous enough to be surveilled for under the USPS system, like screened and x-rayed packages because they might contain an abortion pill, because that would be obscene. That's
Absolutely.
an
And there have been plenty of opportunities throughout the like legal history of it to actually define obscenity. And at every opportunity, the people in charge have gone, I think we're just going to stick with anything that makes me personally go, blah.
mm, mm.
Like it's intentionally broad and flexible so that it can be pretextual. Like that's
Yeah.
how the law works.
Right. And the Miller test, which is a 3-pronged test to define obscenity, sort of, uses the term community standards. And that's all over legislation we're seeing today. And the question I always ask myself is like, well, whose community? Right. And that gets exactly to what you're speaking to of like, well, is it the people representing us? Because our government doesn't look like the United States as a whole, right? The people who are representing us don't necessarily represent my values or my community. And so I cringe a little bit when I see that phrase all of the time.
I also want to add, since we were bringing up the phrase, that we've seen it in practice beyond just the Miller test, in laws where obscenity or safety is written either so vaguely that it can be used to erase LGBTQ people, as Andy mentioned, something that makes me uncomfortable, or so bluntly that they explicitly mention, homosexuality or being LGBTQ as inappropriate. And that's actually word for word from the Oklahoma law that had, banned obscene content online. And then once you go and look into the definition of obscene that they had used in that statute, it mentions homosexuality bluntly. Whereas even though we know homosexuality or LGBTQ content is about who we love and who we are, for the people who are on the other side, on the opposite side, especially in the moment of time that we're in right now, where support for LGBTQ rights and LGBTQ folks is decreasing rapidly, where trans folks are consistently being attacked by every level of government. We know that their understanding of homosexuality will be different than our own communities, and what it means for them is immediately sexualized content.
I want to stay here for a moment with you, Rin, like expanding beyond the law now and thinking about tech platforms. I know you have a unique perspective on how tech platforms are enforcing or failing to enforce these community guidelines, like their own definition of community guidelines, in ways that censor or are erasing queer content. I want to hear about that and how laws are enabling this or threatening this free expression of LGBTQ plus people online.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we've seen this over and over again in anecdotes and through looking at the policies. Tech platforms pick and choose of how they want to apply their community guidelines, and more often than not, queer content does get caught up in the crossfire. And we've seen study after study, queer content is disproportionately flagged for being explicit or being sensitive content, even though it's just educational or affirming. And so, for example, I believe a couple of years ago, there was a research paper about how the word lesbian is often disproportionately flagged or removed on all digital platforms, even when it's just simply used to identify a person or in community building contexts. And they blame those takedowns on algorithms, but we have to understand that algorithms and those decisions don't happen in a vacuum, but they reflect our society and the biases that were baked into those systems. And we're seeing that come up over and over again in our Stop Censoring Abortion project as well. To go back to reproductive rights and how they intersect here, where simply folks sharing information about abortion has led to their accounts being taken down or flagged. So yeah, I think those community guidelines often are a reflection of our societal biases, but also a ripple effect of the laws that we've been talking about, which are increasingly being used to, pressure those platforms into over-censoring LGBTQ content. And I mean, for me, just as a little anecdote of how I make these connections, this has happened firsthand in Florida, where the infamous Don't Say Gay bill included such vague restrictions on age-appropriate content that it gave school districts incentives to proactively censor anything that had to do with LGBTQ folks because they were worried about legal risk. And I have no doubt that that would happen online as well, because just like school districts, when the law is making a platform legally liable for user-generated content, platforms will choose censorship every single time. So I think that, yeah, like the laws and the community guideline policies do work hand in hand here to reinforce each other, really.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned like the biases that are baked into the algorithms deciding what content needs to be moderated out of existence and not, and school districts, because it reminded me of a project that Dave Moss and Jason Kelly and I worked on, the Red Flag Machine, which was like analyzing the student proctoring school monitoring software, essentially these rootkits that are put onto students' devices to decide what content is obscene, and then puts these students in contact often with law enforcement, if not just school officials. And it would so often bring up terms like lesbian, as you mentioned. And I mean, almost always when we would go over these FOIA records, we were just combing through to see what happened. Lesbian was always flagged as pornographic. And just think of like a kid who's just trying to like learn what the word lesbian means, if not even to just identify with it, or maybe they are. And then they learn that that's considered pornographic, and then they're put into contact with law enforcement because of it, which then has this horrible playing or like overlap with things like Don't Say Gay. Well, Mandy, I would love to ask you the same question about tech platforms failing to or actually enforcing these community guidelines and how that impacts the communities.
Yeah, well, what this makes me think of is FOSTA, which is the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act. I think everyone here is familiar with FOSTA. It was a law signed. It was signed into law during President Trump's first term, 2018. And the idea stands for Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act. And the idea was that, legislators wanted to curb sex trafficking that was facilitated by the internet. And so FOSTA said, okay, we're going to hold platforms liable for any content that could promote sex trafficking. And so what you saw after 2018 is this like mass over moderation of any sort of sexual speech on social media platforms, right? It's why I think you see, sex spelled SEGGS or with a 3 or, whatever. The rise of algo speak could be a whole other discussion. But that's what comes up for me, because we've seen this before, right? Like we have data now. FOSTA's been on the books for number of years, and Woodhull actually did research about what happens when sex workers are deplatformed online in a post-FOSTA world, and we found there are all of these real life consequences: loss of income, loss of housing, increase connection with child protective services. So there is a lot of real world IRL consequences when we censor online, and we're just seeing the sort of same playbook applied from FOSTA, just using different topics, which is kind of exactly what Rin was describing.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I'm also often thinking of FOSTA these days, unfortunately. And you're so right to point out the real life impacts and increase of endangerment, not just for sex workers post FOSTA. I mean, for everyone, right? Queer people and beyond, anyone who values free expression online. And even like SFPD, the San Francisco Police Department, reported a nearly 300% increase in trafficking related charges the year after FOSTA. So it didn't even do what it purported to do. It just it failed at that and made the internet worse, which is like, we should have learned our lesson there. All right. Well, I want to change directions. Andy, I'm so fortunate to be familiar with the amazing work that you're doing over at the Chosen Family Law Center, but I'm also grateful to be familiar with the project that you led over at the Harvard Law School, the Protect Your People project. Can you just tell us a bit about that and introduce it to folks here who are not familiar with this?
Yeah, I would love to. So the reason that I got the Harvard gig, despite being wildly unqualified, is that I was supposed to be just sort of interim, like a temporary holdover, after one of the co-founders left while they were looking for another permanent hire. And then once we found the new permanent hire, we were just having so much fun working together. They keep scrounging up more money to keep me around. But the reason that they needed a temporary person is because one of the co-founders of the clinic got doxxed really, really badly. And she went to the school, and the school said, oh, bummer, I guess, and did nothing. She sought help from a bunch of places. No one showed up for her. No one had her back. And she had to change everything about her life, and it sucked. It was terrible. And so she left that job because it didn't catch her when she needed to be caught. And so when I first got there, the first thing that I wanted to do was see if there was anything that I could do in that position to make it less likely that that's what would happen the next time. And so to let employers of queer people in the advocacy space know that they are obligated to protect their people from harassment, doxing, stalking, digital threat, online to offline threat, to let them know that they're obligated to do that and to give them good tools with which to do so. So the way that I put it together is this. So my partner used to work as a solar installer, right? So they were climbing around on roofs, being all butch, very cute. And when you're doing that job, there's a risk involved in the job. And the risk is you fall off the roof, right? And so you need to use protective equipment, protective measures to mitigate that foreseeable risk. So in the case of working on a roof, you wear a fall harness, you have the carabiners, you're attached to stuff to mitigate that foreseeable risk of falling off a roof. And when they were working at that job, they did not have to go to REI and buy their own fall harness, right? Their employer had to provide those safety measures for them because of a law called OSHA. So under OSHA, when there is a foreseeable risk associated with the thing that you're doing for your job, it is your workplace's obligation under OSHA to take protective steps against that foreseeable risk. So if you are doing LGBTQ advocacy for your job, there is a foreseeable risk that you will be subject to digital threat, harassment, doxing, stalking, all of that stuff. And so under OSHA, it is your employer's responsibility to get you Delete Me, to get you training, to get you all of the resources and backup, and to be there when you go to them and have a plan for when their employees say, hey, listen, my home address got leaked. Hey, listen, they're talking about me on Telegram. Like, your employer needs to know how to deal with that because of OSHA. Like, under the law, they are obligated to know how to deal with that. And so this handbook is laying out that line of reasoning. And also, here's what I think, with all of the really brilliant experts that I talk to all over the field. I talk to folks from EFF. I talk to folks from the Cyber Law Clinic, from Palante, all sorts of places, and compiled the best practices for what would it look like if an employer of a person who got doxxed for their advocacy really showed up for them. What would those best practices be? So the handbook is available free online. It's at hlslgbtq.org. Please download it, use it. If you need me to come yell at your boss about it, please call me. I love to yell at bosses more than anything in the world. I would love to yell at your boss.
I'm so grateful for you connecting digital safety and labor rights here. This is huge. I suspect a great number of our listeners right now could really use this information. Could you repeat that link one more time where they can find the handbook?
Yeah, that's hlslgbtq.org.
Fantastic.
HLS, Harvard Law School, LGBTQ.org.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, please, everyone, share that widely because it is greatly needed right now. I also love the analogy you gave about your partner roofing and the tools they use to stay safe. I'm always looking for fresh ways to think about how I do digital privacy and security trainings, which is often these days. Okay, so I want to change direction again, and Mandy, you knew this was coming. I want to ask about age verification. Something that's hot in the news today, all over, is age verification. About half of the U.S. today, or like half of the U.S. states, have some form of it, and we're expecting a ruling any day now. I know some of us were bracing for today on a Supreme Court ruling regarding Texas requiring age verification on adult sites. Correct me if I'm wrong. Mandy, could you explain a bit about how this impacts LGBTQIA plus people and what fallouts it has, and how some of some queer rights orgs out there may be misunderstanding how this is actually detrimental to our cause?
Yes. So for folks who are not familiar with online age verification law, it's the idea that you have to show some form of state-issued identification to access a website with 33.3% or more adult content or explicit content. These laws are written in an odd fashion, I think on purpose. Again, it comes from this idea of like, we need to keep kids safe. We must keep the youth away from explicit content online, and age verification is how we're going to do it. That's sort of the ethos behind these laws. Of course, the issue is it's already illegal for anybody under 18 to access explicit content. So that's already on the books everywhere. But there's this sort of manufactured kind of hysteria, I would say, around explicit content and minors getting access to it. So this all started in Louisiana in 2021. It was the very first state to pass an age verification law. As you mentioned, Daly, it's now active, and it'll be 19 states as of July 1st. Yeah, your facial expression, Andy, is how I feel all the time talking about age verification. So our major issues with age verification are, one, you have a right to access the internet and access information anonymously. And so if you have to provide a state-issued identification, obviously you're not going to be an anonymous browser anymore. So that's one issue. I think most folks in the audience probably know that our data is not really safe when we're giving it over to online platforms. We don't have comprehensive digital privacy protection laws here in the United States. And I think you could probably Google, privacy hack or data hack, and there would be all sorts of articles that come up. The DMV got hacked in Louisiana, which is where this started. And then you have access to all sorts of private information for people. So it's a huge privacy issue. It's also a free speech issue, because if you cannot express yourself freely online in the US, that of course is a violation of your First Amendment right to speech. And the connection to queer and LGBTQ issues is, I'm actually going to read from South Dakota's law. This is one of the more egregious ones on the book, but South Dakota defines sexual conduct, meaning any act of masturbation, homosexuality, sexual intercourse, or physical contact with a person's clothed or unclothed genitals, and it goes on. But homosexuality is right there in the definition next to act of masturbation and sexual intercourse. So it's written into the law in South Dakota, which is obviously very problematic, and a violation of our human rights and civil rights and all of those things. The Supreme Court case you mentioned is out of Texas. It's House Bill 1181, was challenged by the Free Speech Coalition. The name of the case is Free Speech Coalition v. Paxton. Paxton's the Attorney General in Texas. And yes, we are waiting to hear back from the Supreme Court. Arguments were heard this past January. And actually what we're waiting for is to find out if the district court, the Fifth Circuit, which is where this case was before, used the correct scrutiny to judge the law. I'm not going to get too into the weeds here, but there are different ways in which you can apply First Amendment protections to a law. And so the case heard before the Supreme Court is whether or not the Fifth Circuit applied the right scrutiny is what it's called. And so we'll find out if the Supreme Court thinks they did or did not. The law was halted by a Texas state judge, and then it was overturned by the Fifth Circuit using that different kind of scrutiny. And then now it's at the Supreme Court. So it's been had quite a journey on its way to SCOTUS, and similar cases are also being heard in other states, in other districts throughout the United States. So, we'll see how the Supreme Court is feeling about this, hopefully very soon.
Well, I'm not looking forward to it. Thank you for mentioning the suite of privacy risks that these things pose. If anyone has spent any time looking at age verification and age estimation schemes that these platforms are hawking on us, they're trash. They're such trash, and we need to call them out for what they are. I mean, technologically, they're trash, and of course, socially, they're horrible. Ren, I want to pivot over to you and refocus again on just LGBT people and privacy. I want to ask you about what do you think are the biggest digital privacy threats facing the LGBTQ plus community today, and especially under new state and national legislation?
Sure, yeah. So I think this conversation makes it pretty clear that true safety doesn't come from censorship. It comes from giving users tools to empower them to stay safe online, comes from clear moderation standards that everyone understands, and it comes from platforms and people taking accountability for the actual abuse that happens, all of which can be done while still keeping people safe and allowing them to speak freely online. But on an individual level, I think for LGBTQ people and everyone, surveillance and data collection really puts all of us at serious risk of targeting, especially for LGBTQ folks who live in hostile states or homes. We are constantly being tracked through things like our social media activity or search results or health apps or even location. And all of that can be weaponized by law enforcement or even hostile family members to enforce laws or to even just out people and invade their privacy. We've seen a really salient example of that actually out of Colorado, where a group of conservative Colorado Catholics spent millions of dollars to buy tracking data that showed priests who use gay dating apps like Grindr and shared it with their network around the country. All that data is available about us online and can be used by extremist actors to weaponize it against us, especially when it could be used, as I said, under laws that criminalize things like abortion or gender affirming care. So I think having individual digital safety hygiene, which Daly, I know you could speak on for weeks. I think so. Having those protections, LGBTQ folks, especially trans youth, can protect themselves from outing or criminalization and being denied essential services, which is why I think projects like the Harvard Law School project is so important as well to give folks the tools they need to really stay safe online, because it is, you know, every person to themselves, and folks really have to, dig and learn, and it doesn't come easy, and it's a feature, not a bug. It's all by design. This information is hard to find for a reason.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I feel like we've had this brief little window where if you were paying attention in the last 10 years or so and not otherwise, you might have come away with the misapprehension that there's a version of authority that protects queerness, and that our job in working with authority here, meaning things like the moderation of platforms and meaning the state, that if we work with them and we push them towards the best version of themselves, the best possible expression of that authority is the version that protects us. And that, what we were talking about the other day, where, if I go online and I say, hey, everyone, I'm gay, and someone responds to that by saying, I'm going to kill you about it, like, which of those things is subject to moderation? And I think we've had this little interlude of a couple of years where we maybe started to believe that there was a version of online authority that protects what I say and punishes what the person threatening me says. And I think that that's a really dangerous illusion. And I think that I think in order for us to really grapple with the landscape of what the law is now and what the internet is now, I think it's necessary to grieve that illusion and let it go. Because at the base of the idea of making moderation work for us is the idea that we should be looking to an authority to keep us safe. And I think at the end of the day, that's just not right. I think we keep us safe,
I don't think I've ever been in a panel with you, Andy, without you making me like zoom out of my body and like feel my mind expanding in real time. Thank you. On that, actually, well, okay, we're about to jump into Q&A, so I want listeners out there to please drop some questions in the chat windows wherever you're watching from, and we'll queue them up for our panelists here to address. But before we launch into that, staying on this note for just a moment, Andy, I wanted to ask you before we jump into this, talking about like the endangerment of queer people online and off, and like realizing that there's no authority to save us. What do you think can be done in terms of community safety and resilience, and what strategies do you recommend for people?
So I take a lot of my strategy in dealing with digital threat from my background working in intimate partner violence, because there's a version of working in intimate partner violence where you're coming from a very carceral viewpoint, and the idea is this person has wronged you, they've hurt you, and the solution to that, the thing that will heal you, is that they should be punished, right? That they should also suffer, and that will make you feel better. And reliably, we know that that's not the case, right? That using carceral logic and the carceral system, and responding to harm with punishment, doesn't actually make anything better. And so what we've learned in the IPV field, in the intimate partner violence field, right, is that the medicine for abuse is community. Because the thing that abuse does, and the thing that online abuse does, all of this, it tries to isolate you, both practically and psychically, by telling you that no one cares what happens to you, and telling you that over and over and over again in a million different voices. And the medicine for that, the protection against that, is not, well, maybe we can make it so that the police care what happens to me. Like, no, why do we need to do that? Like, we have people who care about us. we have each other. We have queer community, we have trans community. Like, we don't need to try to get someone to care what happens to us by making the state do it. Like, it's not going to. That's a waste of time. And we don't need it because it's obsolete. Like, at the end of the day, when someone is trying to isolate a member of our community, the solution is not, well, what if we hit them back? The solution is, you can't take them away from us. And so I think, you know, the bonds that we have are the soil in which the functional tools to respond to threat and harassment actually grow. And so just as a point of example, you know, one of the things that I commonly see people do for each other in situations of threat and harassment, you know, is you'll set up a filter on your inbox, right, with all of the email addresses that you know and all of the keywords that are likely to come in from whatever is happening. And you have a team of comrades who will, on a regular schedule, check that folder for you and see if there's anything you need to know in it, whether it's because it got missorted in there or because it's an escalation in such a way that you need to know about it. I've got one such filtered folder in my inbox myself, and I have community members that go and check it for me, you know, every 6 months just to make sure there's nothing in there I need to know. Like, it's part of the ecosystem of care that makes up queer community. You know, we protect each other against digital threat. We protect each other against offline threat. You know, we feed each other. We catch each other when we have, you know, post-surgery complications. Like, it's all the same stuff expressed different ways.
Just want to touch on the point about their fear and the isolation. I again, I don't think it's a accident that we've seen year after year more and more young people come out, more and more people finding community online. And just as those numbers keep increasing, the legislation and the attacks keep increasing too. So I just +1 to everything that Andy said. And the fear is the community that the LGBTQ folks have created around them, that people have been able to create for themselves without the structures of government or, you know, authority. You know, we keep us safe.
Wow. Thank you. It really underscores basically everything we've talked about today regarding access, expression, people's like connection online, and the queers never die. We're here no matter what, you know. Okay, so let's jump into we have like a handful of questions rolling in from listeners around the world. I guess I'll just start at the top. Kimberly from YouTube asks, does legal verification of age put the liability on the website? Mandy, I think I'd like to ask you this first.
Yeah. Yes, that's how the laws are written. So it's the platform's responsibility to make sure they're age verifying. But the interesting thing too is a lot of laws are written in such a way that the platform itself can't design its own age verification software. So like, say I'm a porn company, I know I need to age verify. My software engineers can't build our own verification software. We have to go get it from somebody else to do the age verification. And then the way it works is if you're not age verifying, a state can sue you, and the penalties are like a fine, a daily fine. So there have been a couple states, Texas and Kansas, have sued porn companies like for very large amounts of money for not age verifying. But yeah, the liability does get put on the platform.
Also, to add, there are different forms that have been coming up, especially this year, that go beyond the platform as well, where there is device level age verification being shopped around legislatures, where the verification is happening on your device, and that is sending a signal to every website and every app that you use. And then also app level age verification, where on the App Store you're supposed to prove your age, and then that is sending signals to every app that you use. So they're been getting very creative and trying to capture as much info about us on every step of the way.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Rin, because I want to say before when I was talking about the states that have this in effect, right now what's in effect is the web-based age verification, but it is spreading. And actually, I think in one state this year, I think it was Florida, but I could be wrong, they were considering web and device-based at the same time, which is like, okay, I think we have bigger fish to fry here, but it's my personal opinion.
No shade to Florida, but I'm not too surprised. Maybe a little bit of shade. Okay, so let's move on to Tech Daddy Proxy underscore YDG from Twitch asks, do we have any thoughts on threats posed by large language models and AI chatbots, both on a data collection front and as a potentially hazardous source of information for youth trying to understand or discover themselves, or uninformed people looking for information in the latest tech fad, perhaps not knowing how often these models can hallucinate false answers with confidence? Any of you have any thoughts on this one?
Just the large language models freak me out. I don't have like a good answer to this. I just the extent to which they are like suddenly everywhere and in everything and you can't turn them off and they're just like chasing you around. I don't like it. It like before the LLM boom, we were as the Earth, we were on track to transition to renewable energy sources in a way, on a timeline that was that had a chance of bringing down the speed with which the Earth is warming. And since the proliferation of data centers necessary to sustain the use of LLMs, it's no longer possible to transition to renewable energy. We just can't do it anymore. So it's bad. I don't think anyone should use it for anything.
I'd like to add something to that too, because one of the things we get asked at Woodhall all the time is like, all you do is oppose legislation, can't you support anything? And one of the things that is like my soapbox lately is, not lately, maybe for most of my life, is comprehensive sex education that includes media literacy, which I think speaks to a little bit of what this person was asking. Like, I think we need to start to teach adults, frankly, and kids how to recognize this stuff, so that they can better recognize, what is AI, what is disinformation, what is misinformation, all of that stuff. I think that's a really important offline positive step we could be pushing for in our communities. It doesn't have to be legislatively. I mean, it could be literally like just in your school, or teaching your own kids some of that stuff.
Wow. Well, we have some other questions. Well, there's another one from Tech Daddy Proxy, but I think I want to give someone else a chance here. There's Prince Bubbles 74 underscore YDG on Twitch. Oh, okay, wait, I'm gonna go to they have two questions. One is slightly more spicy, and I think I want to go with this one because I want to hear what you all think. I don't know how to ask this not bluntly, but does the law even matter anymore? It feels like they already only applied to certain people, and lately it just seems like if you're rich enough and white enough, you don't have to adhere to the laws and no one will hold you accountable. I don't have it. I'm in a new office right now, but I have a print that just says laws aren't real. Some of my coworkers might not like that, but I don't know. What do you all think?
Yeah, I don't know. As a legal clinic, we might not want to comment on that.
Yeah, look, so it's been really interesting, and I could talk about this for 45 minutes, so please do stop me if necessary. But it's been really interesting teaching at a law school in the last couple of years, because when Dobbs came down, right? My students were in their con law class learning about stare decisis, learning about how the court works, and then they look at the newspaper and they're like, so is everything I'm learning just a lie? Or, you know what I mean? Here's the thing. The word apocalypse is etymologically derived from the Greek word for revealing or unveiling. Everything that feels like the end of the world is actually just the end of an illusion. The thing that has changed in the last few years is not something fundamental about the nature of the law. It is how much you know about the nature of the law. And I tell my students this every semester. Now you know. A lot of lawyers don't get this revelation until later in their career, when they've spent a long time like putting a lot of stock in the law being something that like has moral weight and not just like a sort of ecosystem of norms that we are all moving through and impacted by. So I've been telling my students, like, now you know. Your job as a lawyer is to provide support to people who are navigating this system and nothing else. And like, yeah, it sucks to have that illusion ripped away. It's always painful to lose one of those, to lose one of those things. But I promise you, the things that you are learning about the nature of the law and the nature of the state are not because those things are changing. It's because you know more about it now. And I'm sorry that it sucks. It really does suck. But this knowledge is an important weapon, and you're going to need it.
Wow. Before I ask you what your final thoughts are, I should just say that I just saw Prince Bubbles, who asked this question, just followed up with a "Where can I sign up for your class?" comment. Thank you, Prince Bubbles. Same. I need to take a class from each of you.
Yeah, I'm afraid you have to apply to Harvard Law School. But there may not be a Harvard Law School for much longer, at which point I will be a free-floating wingnut, so keep your eye out.
Well, you do have a very healthy habit of doing things like this, and like, you have a web presence that I'm grateful to also benefit from. So everyone listening, please search up our panelists and learn more from them, because they are geniuses, as you've seen. Okay, so I'd like to just wrap this up with I want to ask each of you what your final thoughts are on this, the sort of tone of the conversation we've taken, what you're holding on to, what you're chewing on, and what to look forward to.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for this conversation, Daly, and Mandy and Andy for joining us. I think I'm leaving here with a lot to chew on, a lot of anecdotes from Andy and Mandy that are super helpful for the work, and hoping that more folks that have been on this stream can leave with more information and feel empowered to also join in and advocating for LGBTQ folks and digital freedom. But I also want to acknowledge that today is the 9-year anniversary of the Pulse nightclub tragedy, which I've been holding closely today and throughout this conversation, and I think serves as a really powerful reminder of why pride and safety still matter so much. So as we talk about digital freedom, let's also honor those lives that we lost 9 years ago today with action, and try to keep building spaces where everyone can be seen and heard and be safe, online and offline.
Thank you. Mandy?
Yeah, that's a really important reminder, and I really appreciate you bringing that in to the space, Ren. What I'm thinking about, well, one, I'm still digesting what Andy said, but I think it is painful to learn that things are an illusion. But what I've been leaning into lately during this time is there's no better time to imagine and dream of something different than a time when the systems that we thought were going to like carry us through the rest of our lives are like crumbling around us. You know, like this is the time to use our brains, use our like intuitive wisdom, our communities, to design a different system, to design something better. And so that's what I've been trying to do, is just like not let what is happening in the world get me down, and not give my despair to them. Do you know what I mean? Like they can't have it. I just have been thinking about like, what can I do differently? And then like I'm gonna do it. I don't know how, and I don't know what the thing is gonna be, but I know that there's brilliant creative people out there who are gonna also help me do all those things. So that's what I've been leaning into. And if folks are looking for something to inspire them, there's a book called Imagination, a Manifesto that I read recently that really helped inspire this thought in me. So I would really recommend it. I think the author's name is Rua Benjamin, I'm pretty sure. Would highly recommend checking it out.
I will be looking that up.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Andy, do you have any final thoughts?
I'm going to be so quick. Thank you so much. It's been such a delight and honor to be speaking with all of you, and I'm so grateful to have been invited to join this conversation. I just want to say, like, there have been 3 things that are always true, right? As long as there have been people, right? We know this. Thing number 1 is there are queer people. Thing number 2 is there are boring assholes that think there shouldn't be queer people. And thing number 3 is they fail. They have always failed at eradicating queerness. Do you really think this is going to be these assholes? Do you really think this is going to be the time they succeed? I do not.
T. Okay, well, I cannot thank you all enough for this. That's all we have time for. Thank you, Rin, Andy, Mandy, for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who contributed to this discussion in the chat, all the great questions, and everyone who's watching around the world. Digital rights begins with you. EFF has been a leader in privacy, freedom of expression, and innovation for 35 years, and we need your help to keep up the fight. Become a member today at eff.org/supportchange. We hope you will continue these conversations about your civil liberties with your colleagues and your friends. But be sure to keep an eye out for the next segments of Affecting Change throughout the year. Thank you for joining us. See you next time, and happy Pride. Woohoo!